the last bonfire, and the men who burned the truth. The place where winter never ended. They say the war ended in 1945. That's the year the newspapers printed peace. The year they showed smiling faces, torn flags, broken statues. The year mothers unclenched their fists from prayer. The year men came back, at least those who still had legs to walk, eyes to cry, voices left to speak. But for me, the war never ended. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I saw. Okay? Because of where it happened. You won't find the village on any map now. Official records listed as abandoned due to weather conditions. A clever phrase. Elegant, even. But snow doesn't bury entire bloodlines. Okay? And frost doesn't burn churches to ash. I've never said its name out loud since I left. Not once. I erased it like they erased us. But tonight, with lungs that wheeze like old doors and bones that creak like the trees outside my window, I feel the weight pushing on my chest. It's not age. It's the silence. It's the silence I've fed for too long. So I'll say it once. Tierschau, a name no longer whispered. A place where even the ghosts are afraid to stay. I was 20 when they came. Not they, as in the Nazis. They had passed through months before. Ghosts in their own uniforms, already hunted, desperate, broken. No, I'm talking about the other men, the ones with clean boots, fresh coats, and foreign tongues. They didn't speak with German accents. They spoke clipped, crisp English, the kind that tasted like metal and smelled like smoke. They smiled like liberators. They saluted like heroes, and they came with fire. We were poor, always had been. Tierschau was a village pressed into the belly of a valley, surrounded by forests that never let the wind pass gently. Our houses were wooden and old. Our church stood crooked on the hill like a tired shepherd. And the people, if they were quiet, proud, cold. My father once told me, war forgets the places that don't make noise. But he was wrong. War doesn't forget anything. It just stores it somewhere darker. They arrived just after the first thaw. Snow still covered the ground like a sheet pulled over the body of winter. But beneath it, the earth had started to rot. The smell of thawing meat, cows, dogs, men, it rose through the ice like guilt through a dream. I remember standing by the well when the trucks appeared, 3 of them, olive green, clean wheels, flags on the side. One had a strange symbol, painted in red, a triangle wrapped in thorns. I'd never seen that symbol before, and I wish I never had. The men who stepped out weren't exhausted like the other soldiers we'd seen crawling back to Berlin. These ones looked rested, well-fed, their uniforms crisp, their eyes hungry, not for food, for something else. Where is your mayor? One of them asked. His German was fluent, too fluent. We told him the mayor had been hanged weeks ago by the retreating SS. He nodded as if it was expected. Then we will take temporary command, he said. Just like that, they walked into the church, set up their equipment, and declared martial order. Within hours, they had a list of names, not of soldiers, of villagers, women, old men, teenagers. They called it Operation Windvale. Still don't know what it meant. None of us did. They said it was a containment mission, that it was precautionary, that we were at risk of residual ideological contamination. I didn't even understand the words, but I understood when they took my sister. She was 16, too young to be dangerous, soft-spoken to threaten anyone, but they took her anyway. Said she'd been seen speaking to a Nazi officer months earlier when the troops passed through. That was true. The officer had bought bread from her. He'd thanked her. She'd nodded. That was all. I tried to follow them. One soldier struck me in the stomach with the butt of his rifle. I remember falling, face first into the snow and coughing blood onto the white. It looked like a flag. That night, fires were lit in the woods. Strange ones, controlled, but too hot, too bright. The village dogs howled. We didn't. We just waited. The next morning, a man was found hanging from the bell tower. Pew wasn't from the village. He wore the same uniform as the soldiers. His eyes were open and his lips were black. The body was gone before noon. No questions asked. The priest was told to keep quiet. He didn't. He disappeared the next day. Said he went to another town, but he never returned. On the third day, the digging began. Large rectangles, uniformed to be farmland. They said they were defensive trenches in case of enemy retaliation, but there were no enemies left. Only us. We weren't told what they were doing, but we could smell it. Chemical stench in the air, quote, like gasoline mixed with death. One boy, Otto, 14, snuck into the trees to watch. He came back, pale, silent. At dinner, he tried to speak. His tongue stuttered like a broken clock. Then he vomited blood and passed out. He died before dawn. No wounds, just silence. I know you won't believe me. No one ever does. That's why I stayed silent for decades. But I still remember what I saw on the sixth night. The sky turned red, not from the sunset, from the forest. They burned something or someone that night, and I swear I heard the screams after the fire stopped. They left 3 days later. No goodbyes, no explanations, just the trucks and silence and a handful of burnt ground, and the symbol, that strange triangle with thorns, was carved into the church door, deep, rough, angry. I tried to scratch it off, but it wouldn't fade. It's still there, I think. The wood survived the second fire, because 2 weeks after they left, Tierschau was declared unsafe. An outbreak, they said. Gas leak, radiation, mold. I don't know. The story kept changing. What I know is this: they evacuated the survivors, and then they bombed it, their own Allied zone. No one spoke of it again, except me, and now you. They wore our faces, bespoke in fire. I remember the last time I saw my sister's hair. It was tangled around a broken branch near the well. Not a full braid, just a few strands, black, shining, caught like a memory that didn't want to leave. I took them, wrapped them in cloth, and hid them in my coat. It was all I had left of her. They said she'd been relocated for questioning, but no one who left with those men ever returned. Hey, and I knew, even at 20, that relocation is just a polite word for disappearance. On the morning after their departure, we searched the woods. We, the remaining sons, brothers, and fathers of Tierschau, walked through the trees in silence, our boots sinking into the thawed mud. Every step felt like stepping into a grave that wasn't ours. We found nothing but scorched earth and iron stakes hammered into the ground. Some still radiated heat. Near one of the fire pits, we found something else. A ring, not a soldier's ring. It was carved, delicate, with a small engraving inside. It belonged to Greta, my sister's best friend. We never saw Greta again. When the trucks had first arrived, the men wore smiles as though they were guardians. But as the days went on, their smiles cracked like paint under rain. The warmth faded. Their eyes turned hollow, almost mechanical, as if they were following orders, too heavy for their bones. One of them, I never knew his name. I remember his face seemed younger than the rest. His jaw trembled when he spoke to us. His hands shook when he passed bread to the children. On the third night, I saw him standing alone, staring into the dark. I thought maybe he was human. Maybe he hated this as much as we did. But when I asked him where they had taken the women, he said nothing. He just looked at me, and I swear I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not guilt, not pity, but fear. The sound of fire traveled strangely through the valley. At night, when everything should have been silent, the crackling of wood and bone echoed like laughter. Sometimes we heard voices, not shouting, but chanting, rhythmic, like prayers made to something that didn't believe in God. I remember lying in bed, listening. Every whisper of fire felt like it was chewing through my walls, through my skin, through my memories. I tried to imagine my sister safe, far away, but the fire told me otherwise. On the 6th day, they came for me, not with guns, with words. "You're strong," they said. "We need young men like you." They smiled as if it was a gift. This invitation to help them build their defensive trenches. I followed, not because I wanted to, but because refusing wasn't an option. The last man who said no, Emil, the baker, was found face down in the stream the next morning. His body had swollen like rotten fruit, and his mouth was stuffed with mud. The trench wasn't for defense. It wasn't for farming. It wasn't for anything but death. At first, I thought they were digging to bury something, but the walls were lined with something black. A residue that smelled of tar and burned meat. One soldier poured liquid from a metal canister into the trench, and the smell was so sharp it burned my eyes. I don't know what it was, gasoline, acid, something worse. The young soldier, the one with the trembling hands, leaned close to me and whispered, "Don't watch tonight." I didn't understand, not until I did. That night, they dragged bodies out of the church basement. Not all of them were dead. Some screamed, some begged. Some didn't make a sound because their mouths were sewn shut. Saw one old man, blindfolded, with a cloth gag, shaking so violently that his shoes fell off. They threw him into the trench like a sack of grain. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to fight. But I stood frozen, my feet buried in fear. And then the fire began. It wasn't just fire, it was something more, a chemical blaze, green and orange, licking the night sky with a fury that felt alive. The heat burnt my face, even from a distance. The smell, God, the smell. It wasn't just wood. It wasn't just bodies. It was the stench of truth being erased. The young soldier who warned me turned his face away. His hands shook so hard he dropped his rifle. When it was over, they made us fill the trench with dirt. No prayers, no markers, just silence. I shoveled until my hands bled. Every clump of soil felt like a betrayal. Afterward, I walked back to my house in the dark, numb, my ears still ringing with screams. I saw my reflection in the well and didn't recognize it. The man in the water had hollow eyes and black streaks across his cheeks. I had been crying without knowing it. The next day, the soldiers pretended nothing had happened. They gave candy to the children, bread to the widows, orders to the men. They even smiled again. But their smiles were wrong now. Sharp, crooked, tired. When they left, they burned the list of names. I saw the papers curl and turn to ash. The last thing I saw on the flames was my sister's name. That was when I realized something. These men weren't here to fight the war. They were here to rewrite it. The map they drew had no mercy. It's strange what you remember when the world ends in silence. Not the moment everything broke, but the little things right before it. The sound of boots on wet stone, the clink of a belt buckle in the dark, the soft scrape of a match against a box, right before it set something alive on fire. You remember the details, 'cause details are all that remain when truth is stripped clean. After the fire pit was covered, they gave us a map. It was hand-drawn, marked with symbols none of us understood. Not military symbols, no tanks or rifles or coordinates. Just red circles, black triangles, and a series of numbers that looked more like a countdown than a code. "This is your perimeter," the officer said. "You are not to cross beyond these boundaries for your safety." But the lines on the map didn't match the village. They cut through houses, fenced off the old cemetery, and completely erased the northern forest contaminated area, they explained. Exposure protocols must be respected, but Contaminated by what? They never said. 3 men were assigned to guard the line. Not soldiers, villagers, men like me. One of them was Franz, the miller. He was 70. The other was Tomasz, a mute since childhood, who carried a rusted hunting rifle with no bullets. I was the third. They gave us armbands and told us to keep the others from crossing the boundary. Anyone who enters that zone cannot be guaranteed extraction, okay? They said it like a threat, dressed as concern. We obeyed. What else could we do? That night, Tomasz saw something in the trees. He didn't speak, so he just pointed violently. Continuo. ChatGPT this. Part 3. The map they drew had no mercy continued that night. Tomasz saw something in the trees. Kanya, he didn't speak, so he just pointed violently, like he was trying to stab the air with his finger. His eyes were wide, and his face had drained of color. At first, I thought it was a deer. Okay, maybe a wolf. We still had a few lurking around the edges of the village when food was scarce. But what he pointed at didn't move like any animal. It stood still. Too still. Its outline was human. But wrong. It was tall, taller than any man I'd seen. Its shoulders hunched like it had been bent for years. It didn't wear a uniform or cloak. Its body shimmered faintly like steam rising from cold ground. Its head tilted slowly in jerks, as if adjusting to the light. And then it vanished. Just stepped backward into the darkness and was gone. No sound, no trace. Tomasz began trembling. He dropped his rifle and ran. I wanted to follow, but something kept me frozen. It wasn't fear, it was recognition, because in that instant, I realized something I never wanted to believe. Whatever they burned in that trench didn't die. The map didn't show roads, or trees, or wells, just a line. The red boundary that divided the world into them and us, but them was never defined. It could have meant the Nazis. It could have meant the sick. It could have meant the dead. Or maybe it meant whatever they woke up when they started burning secrets in that soil. A week passed. The soldiers were gone, but the lines remained. No one crossed the boundary, not even the animals. Birds avoided the sky above the northern forest. Foxes circled wide around the old cemetery. And at night, we heard music. Not real music, just the suggestion of it. A hum, low vibration, like a choir trapped under the dirt, singing through their teeth. Then one night, a child crossed the line. Her name was Miri, 6 years old. She'd been chasing a scarf that blew out of her hands. By the time we noticed, she was already at the edge of the forbidden zone. She stopped, turned to look at us, and smiled. And then, right before our eyes, she was yanked backward by something we couldn't see. It wasn't fast. It wasn't violent. It was like a hand reaching through the air and pulling her gently, silently, into the trees. We screamed, we ran, but when we got to the place where she had stood, all that remained was the scarf. It was warm, like it had just come out of the sun. After that, we tore the map apart. We burned it, Tade, in our minds, in our whys, in the way we walked around certain places, in the way we avoided the church even though it was empty. No one rang the bell anymore, not after we found the dead crow inside it, eyes missing, wings snapped, feathers rearranged into the shape of that same triangle, the one they carved on the door. 2 weeks later, Tomasz was found dead. No wounds, no blood, just gone, like the life had been peeled out of him. His body was sitting upright in the watchpost near the line. His face was turned to the forest. His mouth was full of ash. In his lap, a drawing, a child's drawing, of a man with 4 eyes, standing in the trees, holding hands with a little girl. I never told anyone this, not even the others, but the little girl in the drawing was wearing Miri's scarf. We tried to leave. We packed bags, carts, horses. But every path out of Tierschau led back into it. Not physically, not like a spell or curse, more like every road ended in something unnatural. One group of families tried the western road. They found it had collapsed during a storm that never happened. Another group took the river route. They never returned. I followed the old logging trail, just me and Franz, the miller. Halfway through the forest, we heard voices, women, crying, laughing. My sister's voice was one of them. Franz fell to his knees. He began praying. I pulled him up, forced him to keep walking. But the farther we went, the louder the voices became, until they weren't voices at all, just names. Spoken in a tongue we both knew but had never heard, twisted that way. We turned around. The trail was gone. We walked all night in circles until we emerged from the woods back in Tierschau, back where we started, covered in mud and with no footprints behind us. That was the last time I tried to leave. Eventually, the government came, but not the army, not the Red Cross, not the Americans, just men in dark suits, no flags, no ranks, no names. They asked no questions. They didn't care about the missing, the fires, or the lines. They took what was left of the soldiers' equipment. They took the church bell. They even took the soil bags of it, shoveled into black containers. When they left, one of them handed me a paper. It said, "Thank you for your cooperation. The situation has been neutralized. Speak of this to no one." And at the bottom, that same triangle. But this time, had a single word beneath it. Witness. They didn't sign it. They didn't need to, because by then, I understood. Tierschau wasn't a village anymore. It was a test site, a place to bury something they were afraid to admit existed. And we were the experiment, not to see how we'd survive, but how long we'd stay quiet. The witness program was never about protection. When you're labeled a witness, you expect protection. That's what the word promises, isn't it? That you'll be watched over, guarded, shielded from whatever it is you saw, or from those who don't want it remembered. But that's not what happened. What they gave me wasn't protection. It was isolation, surveillance, and a different kind of prison, one made not of bars, not of silence, stitched into every room I entered after that day. They didn't take me far. A black car arrived 3 days after the suits left the village. They called me by name. Not boy, not son, not even villager. They called me subject for the B. I didn't ask where the A went. I just got in. The drive was long. We passed through cities I couldn't name, crossed bridges that didn't exist on my maps. Eventually, we arrived at a facility hidden beneath the shell of an abandoned train station. They called it Stellwerk. Just a word. It meant nothing to me. But the air around it smelled like paper, steel, and secrets. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet, like even the walls had signed confidentiality agreements. The room they gave me was clean, sterile, white, sheets, metal frame, no windows, only a mirror. At first, I thought it was just glass, but when I stared long enough, I saw the movement, the blink, the shimmer of another presence on the other side. Someone was watching. Always. They gave me food. They gave me pills. They asked me questions, but never about the soldiers. Never about my sister. Never about the fire. Instead, they asked about dreams, smells, sensations. Have you felt anything unusual around water? Do the trees speak to you when the wind blows? Does your blood ever feel warm without cause? That's when I understood. They weren't interested in what I remembered. They were interested in what I might become. After 3 weeks, they moved me to another wing. This one had others, 5 men, 3 women, all from different places, all silent, all carrying something invisible but heavy. We weren't allowed to speak. But sometimes, in the hallway, our eyes met, okay? And in those seconds, I saw stories I couldn't handle. A woman with a scar shaped like a circle behind her ear. A boy who flinched every time a light bulb buzzed. An old man who had forgotten his own language but still whispered one name at night. Vola. Vola wasn't a name I knew, but every time he whispered it, the lights flickered. They called us the witness cohort. I heard it once in a report someone dropped by accident. It wasn't a protective program. It was a containment strategy to keep what we saw and maybe what we carried away from the public eye. One night, the girl across the hall began to scream. Not just cry, not panic, but scream like something was trying to tear her open from the inside. The guards came, dated her, dragged her away. The next day, her room was empty, like she'd never been there. Even her name tag had been replaced with a number I didn't recognize. That's when I knew no one left Stelwerk, not alive, not fully human. They called me for extraction after 61 days. They said I'd been cleared. I was safe to return to society. I didn't believe them, but I walked out anyway. They gave me a new ID, a new surname, new city. No one from Tierschau ever contacted me again. Not even the others who had survived. Maybe they were given new names too. Maybe they forgot on purpose. Or maybe they weren't allowed to remember. But I remembered everything because I didn't just witness the horror. I inhaled it. I buried it. And sometimes, late at night, when the room goes too quiet, I feel it breathing, still inside me, like the fire never really went out. The witness program didn't protect me. It rebranded me, so the story could be erased, because there are two ways to kill the truth: burn the evidence, or keep the witness so far from themselves they no longer trust what they saw. They tried both, and they failed, because I'm still here, still writing, still speaking, and soon someone will read this. Someone who knows the shape of that triangle. Someone who's seen fire that doesn't burn wood. It burns memory. If that's you, keep listening, because the next part of this story was never meant to survive, but it did. They measured our silence in years. When I was released from Stelwerk, if you can call it a release, they told me something I've never forgotten. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was almost gentle. One of the men in the black coat always spoke softly, but never blinked, leaned in close and whispered, "The less you speak, the longer you live." At the time, I laughed, 'cause it sounded like something my grandfather would have said over soup. But now, decades later, I hear it differently. It wasn't advice. It was a formula, a method, an agreement between my silence and my survival. And I've honored it for years. But time does something to silence. It starts to echo. The city they placed me in was gray. I don't just mean the buildings, so they were crumbling and blank, like memories half erased. I mean everything. The food tasted gray. The air smelled gray. Even the people moved like shadows without temperature. They gave me a job at a warehouse, lifting things, moving things, keeping my head down. No one asked questions. No one used real names. We were all placed like furniture, like dangerous furniture. Sometimes I would catch my reflection in the train windows, and I wouldn't recognize myself. It wasn't the face. It was the absence behind it. Like whatever I'd seen had hollowed me out, okay? And something else had moved in. Not evil, not alien. It's just quiet, too quiet. The first time I spoke about Tierschau, again, it was by accident. A woman neighbor, maybe 30, asked me where I was from. She smiled when she said it. Just a friendly question. It's just small talk. I said the word before I realized it had been waiting in my mouth for years. Tierschau. And then the power in the building flickered. The lights above us went dim. Expression shifted. Not confused, not surprised, but frightened, like she had heard that word before. and had been trained to forget it on command. She walked away, moved apartments a week later, never looked at me again. I started writing soon after that, not out loud, not in letters, but in the margins of newspapers, in notebooks I kept under my mattress. Fragments, dates, smells, questions I wasn't allowed to ask. Why did the smoke sing? What did they burn that didn't scream until morning? Where do memories go when the map erases them? I filled pages, burned most of them, kept only what wouldn't let me go. 10 years passed, no contact, no check-ins, nothing. Then, on a cold morning in November, an envelope arrived. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a photo, black and white, blurry dot. It showed the well in the center of Tierschau, still standing, still cracked, but behind it, something new. A tower, metal, surrounded by scaffolding and men in suits. They were building something, not rebuilding, constructing. Over the grave, burying it deeper. On the back of the photo, one sentence written by hand: "The fire still breathes." That's when I realized they hadn't forgotten me. They were still watching, still measuring my silence like a ticking clock, and something had changed. They weren't afraid of me speaking. They were afraid someone else might start remembering. 2. I started seeing patterns after that: newspaper articles about lost villages, reports of radiation anomalies, stories of locals hearing music in the woods. It wasn't isolated, it was spreading. Different names, same symptoms, and always, there was a redacted file, a missing person, or fire no one could explain. I gathered them all, clipped them, coded them. My wall became a map. And on that map, I drew the triangle. Every line was pointed back to Tierschau. One night, I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard in 40 years. The chant, that low, rhythmic hum like a choir underwater, except this time was coming from inside my apartment. I turned on every light, ticked every window. Nothing, but the sound remained, not loud, not threatening, just persistent. It was inside the walls. Inside me, the next morning, my notebook was missing. Only one thing was left behind on my kitchen table: a new map, hand-drawn, same style, same red boundary, but this time circled my apartment. That was when I knew they weren't measuring my silence in days. They were measuring it in containment radius, and the radius was shrinking now. I'm writing this from somewhere they can't reach. Not yet. An old cabin, far from power, far from roads. It's cold here. It's too cold for spring, just like Tierschau, just like the day they came. If you're reading this, if this message survived me, remember one thing: silence is not protection. It's a ritual, and someone is counting how many of us still obey it. The smoke had a memory of its own. I've come to believe smoke is not what we think it is. It's not just the byproduct of fire. It's not just ash in the air. It's not just the remains of something that used to have shape. No doubt smoke remembers. It carries what it consumed, floats with the weight of memory, even if you can't see it. That's why it stings your eyes. It's not from heat, it's from recognition. And the smoke that came from Tierschau was never meant to dissipate. The night before they built the tower over the village, well, someone sent me another envelope. Again, no return address, just coordinates. It led to a small roadside chapel in the hills above Salzburg, a place I'd never been, a place that shouldn't have existed. Inside it, a book, plain black cover, title. Inside, pages filled with symbols, triangles, circles, spirals, mixed with words in multiple languages: German, English, Latin, Cyrillic, Hebrew. It was a language of fire. That's what I called it, because some of the ink was scorched into the page, not written. The margins had notes, some in handwriting I recognized. One phrase appeared over and over again: the smoke still knows your name. I tried burning the book. It wouldn't catch. Not with matches, not with gasoline, not even with fire from the stove. It resisted combustion like it had already been burned too many times and refused to burn again, so I buried it deep. But that night, my apartment filled with the smell of smoke. Again, that single quote was when the dreams started coming back. The ones I had at Stalwork, the ones they recorded. Yes, they recorded our dreams. Wires in our skulls, electrodes along the spine, ink blots on our thoughts. They said it was for research, to study the neural architecture of trauma. But that wasn't it. They weren't studying trauma. They were tracking it like it was a virus in my dream. I was back at the trench, but it was deeper now. Endless, and the bodies inside weren't dead. They were awake, staring, whispering, but not in German, not in any known tongue. They spoke in smoke. Their mouths exhaled it in patterns that formed sentences I could feel in my bones, but not understand. And in the middle of the trench, sitting cross-legged, was my sister. She looked at me and she said something I will never forget, not because of the words, but because of how it broke the dream when she said it. The fire didn't kill us. It fed us to something that remembers. I woke up with ash on my hands, not metaphorically, actual ash, under my fingernails. In my sheets, the window was closed. The stove was off. There was no fire, but the smoke had been there. Just enough to leave a fingerprint. I tried to tell someone. I contacted a journalist I remembered from the early days, someone who had written about disappearing villages in military denial. He agreed to meet, but when I arrived at the cafe, the table was already set with 2 cups of coffee, untouched, and a napkin, folded in half. Inside, written in careful block letters, "They always send the witness first, then they burn what he touches." I ran. I didn't look back, didn't go home. That's how I ended, up here in this cabin, writing, because I've realized something worse than being burned live, worse than being forgotten, being remembered by something that is not human. They thought the smoke would fade, but it did. It settled, it soaked into stone, skin, and memory. And now, it's waking up again, not just in me, in others. I've seen signs, random fires, old buildings collapsing with no heat source, survivors from different wars, Vietnam, Iraq, Bosnia, all reporting the same dreams. It's the same symbol carved into trees, appearing in photographs, burned into metal, a triangle inside a circle, inside another triangle. That's when it hit me. The triangle wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. In Stalwork, told us that witnessing trauma can create fractures in the brain. But what they didn't say is, sometimes those fractures are windows. Something looks back. I've stopped trying to protect myself. I know now that I was never the target. I was the recording device, and this writing is the playback. If you're still reading, then you're already infected. But maybe that's good. Maybe enough eyes on this can change something, or maybe it just spreads the fire. But either way, the smoke still remembers. And now, so do you. What the fire saw when it looked back. They always warned us not to look directly into the fire. As children, they said it would blind us. As soldiers, they said it would haunt us. Stalwork. They said nothing but made us sit in front of controlled flames while they monitored our brainwaves. The heat didn't burn us, but something else did. Because when fire looks back, it remembers who started it, and it never forgets. The first time I truly understood that, I was 17, before the war, before the uniforms, before the secrets, before Tierschau was anything more than a cold place with warm bread and colder prayers. It was a harvest ritual, a bonfire, a celebration of the end of winter, the beginning of something lighter. Everyone danced, even the old men, even the dogs, and I stood near the flame, watching. That's when I saw it just for a second. A flicker of something inside the fire. A shape like eyes. Not angry, not cruel, just awake, watching. And now, decades later, I think maybe that same flame is what the soldiers brought with them. What if the fire wasn't their tool? What if it was their passenger? They didn't burn Tierschau to kill. They burned it to feed, to release something that had been stored in the old bones of that place. To wake it up. The documents they erased, the people they took, the symbols they drew. They weren't erasing history. They were completing a ritual. One that began long before 1945. You see, I found something recently in the pages of an old church ledger I managed to recover from an antique shop, mislabeled UNTRANSLATED. It was a record from 1781. Same village, same location, same strange triangle drawn next to the names. It spoke of a cleansing, of a fire that whispered names at night, of children who spoke backwards in their sleep, of a priest who burned his own hands and claimed the smoke had voices. They sealed the church for 80 years after that, but someone opened it again, and eventually the war found it. Or maybe the war was led to it. What if Tierschau wasn't a casualty? What if it was the destination? That would explain the fire. Not random, not chaotic, strategic, because there's a difference between destruction and offering. One is mindless, the other is precise. And what they built over the well wasn't a memorial. It was a lid to keep something buried, but lids crack, seals break, and I think something is leaking again. Last week, I received another envelope. Again, no name, but inside a single photograph. Blurry, infrared, clearly taken by satellite. It showed heat signatures rising from where Tierschau used to be. Not from buildings, not from machines, from the ground itself. Like a heartbeat. I shouldn't be alive. Not after what I saw. Not after what I carried. But maybe that's the point. Maybe they didn't want me dead. Maybe they needed someone to remember, till it remembered me back. I've started coughing again, Ash, same as before. And now, when I breathe out into the cold air, the vapor doesn't vanish. It lingers, takes shape, forms whispers I can't unhear. I've stopped sleeping, because in my dreams, I'm no longer alone. There's something standing behind me in every one. Same height as my sister, same outline, but her eyes are wrong. Too bright, too full of flame, and she never speaks, but the fire around her does. It hisses words like, "You are the match. You were chosen because you didn't burn. You are the last ember." I don't know what that means, but I'm starting to believe. I'm not here to tell the story. I'm here to pass it on. The map led inward, Kant out. Maps are supposed to show you the way out. That's what they teach you as a child. North means escape. Lines mean roads. Legends mean truth. But the last map I found didn't lead out of anything. It led in, inward, downward, backward. Not to a location, to a memory. A buried one, not just mine. Ours, because some places don't exist on land. They exist in the folds of the human mind, okay? And someone, years ago, carved coordinates into my trauma like tattoos under my skin. The map was etched into the back of a photograph. I didn't notice at first. It looked like scratches, marks from age, okay? Damage from weather. But when I held it against the light, I saw it. Thin, precise, purposeful. A spiral drawn in reverse. Okay. Each ring labeled with a word I hadn't heard since. Stellwerk, internship tone, internal stratification. It's a term they used for what they believed happened to people who witnessed unexplainable trauma. They claimed memory didn't just fracture. It reorganized, built layers, strata, and they believed, with enough pressure, you could dig through those layers and find something buried deeper than identity. Something older that was their true experiment, not how trauma breaks people, but what it reveals. Because fire doesn't only destroy, it purifies. And whatever I saw in Tierschau, whatever followed me through Star Work, through the witness programs, through the years of imposed silence, it wasn't meant to be forgotten. It was meant to be uncovered. The spiral on the map pointed not to a location in Austria, but to a place. In my mind, a recurring image I had forgotten. One they told me was a hallucination. A room, circular, stone walls, an iron grate in the ceiling, and in the center, a chair made of antlers. Yes, antlers, like something sacred or sacrificed. As a child, I thought it was a nightmare. As an adult, I thought it was a metaphor. But now, I think it's real, or something close enough that it still leaves heat on my skin when I remember it. That's where they took us during our last week in Stelwerk. They called it Session Omega. We weren't given names, only numbers. Mine was for to be, but in that room, it didn't matter, because the moment we entered, forgot who we were. Not permanently, not fully, but long enough for them to ask us questions no human should be able to answer. And we did. They called it accessing the fire memory, a theory that trauma, when deep enough, reaches into ancestral layers of consciousness. Things remembered not by the individual, but by the species, collective burn scars, stored in silence, activated by ritual. That's why the soldiers had chanted. That's why they carved the symbol into the church door. It wasn't just to intimidate, it was to awaken us, to prepare the soil. And I think I was one of the few in whom it worked. Not because I'm strong, not because I'm special, but because I broke slowly. Slow breaks leave cleaner fossils. I've started sketching that spiral again, on paper, on walls, in the dirt behind the cabin. I don't know why, but it comes through me, and every time I finish drawing it, I hear something behind me. Soft, patient, warm, but not comforting. A presence that doesn't move, but grows like smoke in still air. Last night, I dreamed of the room again, but this time I wasn't sitting in the chair. I was watching, and in the chair sat a child. His eyes burned like coals, but his voice was soft. He looked up at me and said, "You're not the witness, you're the ember. You survived the fire, not to tell the story, but to start it again." That's when I woke up, and the spiral was burned into the floor beneath. My bed not drawn, burned, as if something inside me had done it, or something that had entered. From the map I tried to bury. I don't know how much longer I have before they find me again, but I know now this was never about war. War was the excuse. This was about fire, about memory, about smoke that breathes and is spreading again, not across countries, across minds. If you've been having dreams, if you see symbols in places they shouldn't be, if fire follows you without flame, you're part of it. You're part of us and the spiral. It's only the beginning. Some ashes still breathe when the wind is right. Ash is supposed to be the end, the final form of matter after everything else has burned away. Name, shape, voice, but no one ever tells you that some ashes still breathe. Not visibly, not loudly, but when the wind is just right. When the silence bends the room around you, you can feel them inhale, and when they do, the past doesn't just return. It spills. It happened 3 nights ago. I was outside, chopping wood. The air was still, the kind of still that doesn't feel natural. It's not peace, pressure, like the world was holding its breath, waiting. That's when I saw the trail of ashdot. It started at the edge of the forest, a thin, perfect line, like someone had poured it from a cracked urn. It curved slowly, deliberately, forming a spiral dot again. But this one wasn't mine. It led straight to my cabin door. I didn't step on it. I didn't disturb it. I watched, and then I waited. Nothing happened until the wind shifted just slightly. A breeze no stronger than a sigh, and the ash lifted, not scattered, lifted as one unit, like it recognized me, and when it moved, I heard it again. The fire remembers its builders. That night, I went back inside and started digging. Not outside, not in the dirt, in myself, through every journal entry, every note I'd ever written, but been too afraid to read again. And in one of them, dated February 4th, 1946, found something I swear I never wrote. A sentence, scrawled in handwriting that resembled mine, but with an urgency I never use. Ash doesn't settle. It waits. And below it, a name. H. Grants. That name hadn't crossed my mind in over 50 years. Grants was one of the officers who arrived in Tierschau the day after the fire trench was sealed. He didn't wear a uniform. He wore a coat with no markings, a blank silver ring, and gloves made of something that didn't look like leather. He never touched anything directly, but everything he looked at broke. Windows cracked. Dogs howled. One child fell into a seizure just from standing too close to him. We didn't speak, but I remembered his eyes. They weren't cruel. They were calm, the kind of calm that knows chaos is its pet. I started researching. Nothing official, no military records, no grave, but in an obscure article buried in the archives of a defunct Soviet-era journal, I found mention of a man matching his description, described as an observer assigned to containment procedures regarding sites of unexplained combustion and atmospheric distortion. No photographs, known to appear after anomalous fires, associated with a symbol resembling a nested triangle. My stomach turned, because that meant two things. Grants was never military. Grants was still being seen as late as 1987, and here's what broke me. A photo attached to the article, nearly ruined by time. Blurry, poor resolution, but unmistakable. There, standing in the background of a disaster site, ash still in the air, was a man with a blank silver ring, and next to him, a child, small, pale, holding a spiral-shaped medallion. I recognized the child. It was me. The photo was dated 1949, 3 years after I was released from style work, in a city I have no memory of visiting. So I ask again, who am I? A witness? A survivor? A test subject? Or something else? Something the fire didn't destroy, but used. I've stopped trusting my memory, because the ashes keep giving it back to me in fragments I never had before. Dreams of people I've never met, languages I've never spoken, but understand. Maps burned into pages of books I don't remember owning, and names. Always more names, etched in smoke. Breathed out in the spiral. I don't think the fire is chasing me anymore. I think it's gathering, and I think I'm the last one who still knows how to hear it. Not because I survived, but because I stayed open, cracked, in just the right way. Burned just enough to breathe back. If you're still reading this, ask yourself, have you ever seen a flame dance without wind? Have you ever smelled smoke with no fire? Have you ever heard a name whispered inside your dreams? One you don't remember giving. That's how it starts. That's how it finds you. The shape of what burned was never human. There's a truth I've been circling around for decades. Not because I was afraid to name it, but because I didn't know how. You see, everything we think we understand about war, fire, destruction, even death, it's all shaped by the assumption that it begins and ends with us, that humans build, break, and bury. But what I saw in Tierschau is what I feel breathing now in the cracks of my mind. It wasn't made by human hands, and it didn't burn like wood, because the shape of what burned was never meant to walk like us. I think they brought it with them. Or maybe it was already there, waiting. Either way, when the soldiers opened the church cellar, they didn't just find hiding villagers. They found a form, something stored, bound, or sleeping, a mass that didn't cast a shadow. A body that hummed instead of bled. A shape you could only see if you forgot what a body was supposed to look like. And I only saw it once. through a sliver in the wooden boards they nailed over the entrance. A flicker, a silhouette. It wasn't tall, but it bent the space around. It like air was ashamed to touch it. It moved without moving. It pulsed. And when I looked too long, I felt something curl in my stomach. Not fear, not horror, recognition. The priests had sealed it. In 1781, that's what the records said, that they locked the breath of Cain beneath God's floor. Symbolic, maybe, but I don't think they were exaggerating. I think they captured something ancient, something pre-human, something made of fire and memory and hunger. And when war gave them the excuse, they opened the door again. Grant wasn't there to stop it. He was there to observe its emergence. He watched the burning. He recorded the screams. He took samples of the ash, the blood, the air itself. And when it was over, he said one sentence. To no one in particular. Phase 1 complete. Right. Subject, migratory. Then he walked away. Subject, migratory. That's the part I never understood until recently. They weren't trying to contain the entity. They were trying to give it legs, a vessel, a host to possess, to be remembered by. And that's when I realized something horrifying. What if I was that vessel? What if the reason I wasn't killed was because I inhaled it, because I was the one who saw it first? Since that day, the signs have returned in patterns, to exact, to ignore. Fires starting in old churches, always around the pulpit, spirals carved into ceilings, as if from the inside. Children speaking, languages no one can trace, cackles appearing in frost on windows, whispers in smoke, only heard when standing in complete silence, all of them pointing to migration, to awakening, to something that doesn't need a body, only a memory. That's the thing about fire. It doesn't move by walking. It spreads by touch, by wind, by oxygen, by story. In this story, the one I've tried to contain, it's burned through page after page of my life. And now it's burning you. I've stopped trying to escape it. There's no out. The map doesn't lead that way. It only leads to the center of the spiral, to the place where memory becomes fuel. And at that center sits something that looks like a person, but isn't. Not really. It smiles with a face made of smoke. It wears our pain like a robe, speaks in voices you forgot you knew. And when it breathes, entire villages vanish. Tierschau was only the beginning. There are more places now. I've started marking them. Every time I feel the heat on my skin, I draw a small triangle on the wall. I'm running out of space, and I fear that when I complete the final symbol, I'll vanish too. Not die, be consumed, folded into the archive of Ashdod like the others. If this happens, if I disappear before part 15, let this page serve as my final breath. The fire is not coming. It's already here, and you've already breathed it. There are names that only burn. Some names are meant to be spoken. Some are meant to be remembered. But there are others, names that were never supposed to be said aloud. Not because they hold power, but because they hold fire. And when you speak them, even in a whisper, they don't echo, they ignite. I learned one of those names last night. It came to me in a dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. I'm starting to lose the boundary between sleep and memory. I was standing in the forest again. Not the forest behind the cabin, the one behind the church in Tierschau. And the trees were not trees anymore. They were figures, twisted, charred, holding their arms up like broken prayers. And at the center of the clearing, a voice began to speak from the smoke, not from a mouth, from the smoke itself. The voice said, "You are not the first, but you are the loudest. The ash has heard you, and now it remembers the name." And then I saw it burned into the ground. 3 letters. Not in any alphabet I recognized. Not written, branded. My eyes bled in the dream. When I woke up, I was gasping because the letters were still behind my eyelids. I tried writing them, but the ink ran. Every pen I used dried out as I pressed it to the page. The name didn't want to be captured, only felt. I went back to the site. Yes, I returned to Tierschau. What's left of it? It's fenced now. Barbed wire, signs that say restricted zone. But I got through. There are holes in every system, and the fire taught me how to find them. The well is still there, dry, cracked, but breathing. I felt it the moment I stepped near it. A faint exhale, warm. I threw a rock down. No sound, just darkness. But on the wind, I had it. That same name, repeating like an old song with no end. And I realized the name wasn't for calling something. It was for keeping it asleep. A chant, a lock. And when we forgot the name, the lock broke. I've begun seeing people again. Figures at the edge of the trees. Eyes that reflect too much light. They don't speak, but they follow. I used to think they were memories. Now I think they're embers, leftover pieces of what was burned, waiting for flame to return. And I fear I am that flame, because when I speak, the air warms. When I dream, the pages around me curl. When I remember, the wind shifts. And now I understand the phrase. They told me in Stelwerk, the one carved into the wall in the forbidden wing. Your name is not yours anymore. The archive of forgotten fires. We think of fire as temporary, a moment, a flash, a transformation, and then gone. But there is an archive, a place where every fire ever lit leaves a shadow. Not just smoke, imprint. And in Stelwerk, Thea, they had a room for those shadows. I wasn't supposed to see it, but on my 43rd day, I forgot to relock one of the doors. I entered, and what I found, I still don't have words. No lights. It's just walls that pulsed, not with electricity, with heat. Every panel contained an object, preserved in glass, not artifacts, not relics, remains. A spoon melted around a tooth, a page fused to human skin, a shard of bone etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. Each one was labeled with coordinates, dates, and names, but some were unlabeled, just sealed, as if the very act of naming them was forbidden. And in the center of the room, a mirror framed in black metal, cold to the touch, but it didn't reflect me. It reflected a place I had never seen, but knew. The trench, the one they burned. But in reverse, the fire was frozen. And the people inside it were reaching upward, as if the flame was their only way out. I stared for hours, till I saw myself inside the trench, not as I was, as a child, mouth open, eyes closed, and the fire around me spoke my real name, not the one I was given, the one I inherited. I left the room. I never told anyone, but ever since that day, I've been burning from the inside out, slow, patient, purposeful, because the archive didn't just hold fire, it held its language. And now I speak it, even when I'm silent, especially when I'm silent. They tried to bury the archive after the project ended. I know this. I found a document, half burned, inside the lining of a coat I bought at a second-hand shop. Coincidence? There are no coincidences anymore. The document was marked Operation Veilfall. Its mission was simple: seal all fire, memories, remove all surviving witnesses, contain residual flame bearers. I was one of them. I wasn't removed, so I was contained. But containment only works if the fire sleeps, and I've been dreaming again. The heat between names. There's a space between things we name, between man and memory, between silence and scream, between ash and flame. That space is where it lives. Not it like a monster, not a demon, not a god, but a breath, a pressure, a force that waits in the heat between names. They tried to give it form. That's what the experiments were in Stelwerk. In other facilities, the ones that don't appear on maps, they took survivors of fire events, made them remember. forced them to relive everything in dream loops, then measured what emerged. Some screamed. Some went silent. Some caught fire without matches. They were removed, disappeared, but not forgotten, because I saw them again in mirrors, in windows, in the smoke curling out of fireplaces, whispers, always repeating the same phrase, "We are the warmth you abandoned." I think it wants to come back. I think it wants a name, but not just any name. Mine, yours, ours, because names give shape, and shape gives power, and power spreads. That's why I've been writing, not to tell a story, but to trap it, to fold the heat into language, to keep it from leaking. But I'm running out of pages, and the room is warm. Again, too warm, like breath on the back of the neck. Last night, the triangle appeared again, not carved, burned into the snow outside, and it was melting, not outward, inward, as if the flame was below, it's pushing up, trying to reach. I think it's almost here. Not the fire, the memory, the one that started this, the one none of us could remember because it was never ours to begin with. But it's been waiting, got coiled, smoldering, and now, as I write these final lines, can smell it, not smoke, naming, the moment before the fire speaks. What comes after the smoke knows you, the last bonfire I lit. The fire tonight, not out of fear, out of understanding, because what burns at the end is not the world. It's the illusion that it was ever whole, that we were ever alone. That silence was ever safety. I placed the notebook, all of it, into the pit, and it burned like it had been waiting. No smoke, no ash dot, just release. The witnesses stood around. Me, not speaking, not blinking. They watched me dissolve. Not physically, historically, because once the fire remembers you, you don't die. You unexist. Your fingerprints lift. Your photographs fade. Your names dissolve from census records and birth certificates until the only place you remain is in the warmth people feel when standing too close to something they shouldn't understand. I feel it now. The spiral collapsing. Inward, not ending. Restarting, because that's what the bonfire was always meant to be. A cycle, a summoning, a signal. The triangle appears one last time on the back of my hand. Smoke, and then, gone. You, reading this, may feel something warm now. A flicker of recognition. A strange dream when you sleep tonight. You'll wake up remembering a village that doesn't exist. A name you've never spoken. A trench that's still burning beneath the ground. You'll try to forget. You won't, because I passed it too. You, the invitation. The ember, the last breath of a fire that never died, only waited. Welcome to the flame. Now it's your turn. If any part of this story lit something inside you, if you dreamed of places that don't exist, if you felt chills reading names you've never heard before, speak. Drop a comment below. Tell me what came to your mind, what you remember that no one else seems to, what you felt, even if you didn't understand why. I will read every single comment, one by one, because maybe the pieces missing from my memory are hidden in yours. And maybe, if you speak, smoke will finally let you rest. Are you ready to tell the fire what it's been waiting to hear?